Afternoon, adventurers. Divine Soul Sorcerers are in a unique position to use Metamagic on Cleric spells. And while this can be done with a Cleric Sorcerer multiclass, it's definitely more efficient to just be a Divine Soul, use Charisma for all your spellcasting, and not have to divide your spells known and prepared by class. So, having played a Divine Soul pretty extensively myself, I figured might as well make a video or a few videos about what metamagic stands out for various cleric spells. And this is going to be a series, a short series, because I like to ramble, and I don't want this video to be exceptionally long. So first I want to start by making sort of a general disclaimer. I'm not going to point out every possible metamagic for every spell. There are plenty that can apply across the board. Like anything with a one action casting time can be quickened. Anything that deals damage can be empowered. Anything that uses an attack roll can use the new Seeking spell in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Anything that involves a saving throw can be heightened. Anything that targets a single creature can be twinned. I'm not making this video to point out every single metamagic that can apply to these cleric spells. I really just want to touch on the standout ones for each spell. So let's get right into it with the cantrips. And I do want to start this one by also making a note about the Quicken spell metamagic. Because of the way the rules are written, if you cast any spell as a bonus action, be it a leveled spell or a cantrip, you are limited to cantrips with a casting time of one action for the rest of the turn. For this reason, if you want to cast a leveled spell and a cantrip in the same turn, you can do that, but the leveled spell is the one that has to be quickened. If you want to cast two cantrips in the same turn, or cast the same cantrip twice, you can use Quicken spell to do that. That said, let's launch right into it with Guidance and Resistance first, because that's the one I wrote on my cheat sheet first. So, Guidance and Resistance, you cast on an ally, targets one creature, can be twinned, and it gives them plus 1d4 on an ability check for guidance or a saving throw for resistance, and then it goes away. This is very good out of combat for everything from investigating a room to disabling a trap or unlocking a door to making charisma checks to convince people of stuff. And it's because of that last one, I also say this is a good candidate for Subtle Spell, because some people, some creatures may take offense if you cast a bunch of spells in their vicinity while they're trying to have a conversation with you. But if you just sort of walk up and put your hand on your friend's shoulder, your bard or rogue or sorcerer, you're a sorcerer, you might have good charisma, cast it on yourself. Uh, and cast as a subtle spell. So that the enemy, I shouldn't say enemy, so that the person you're talking to doesn't pick up on it. There could be some use in that. Thaumaturgy I like as a subtle spell because, for the same reason, you can affect some change in your local area without giving away that you're casting a spell. For example, a door can just slam shut or rocket open, or the ground can start shaking for seemingly no reason. I like that from an RP perspective, and it could have some use. Thaumaturgy is definitely a spell that you have to be creative with its use. You don't have to, but you should. And Metamagic just opens that up for more possible shenanigans. As for mending, there's not a lot that you can really do with Metamagic, because if you're going to cast mending, you're going to sit there for a minute. Whatever you're mending, you probably can physically touch. If it's out of your reach, you could cast it as a distant spell, but that is a pretty niche use. Light, you cast as an extended spell. It's the first of many spells that I'm going to mention in the series that lasts an hour, so extending it to 2 hours is even better. Although Light is a cantrip, so at the end of the first hour you could just cast it again, so it's a bit less valuable there. Probably not necessary to spend the one sorcery point extending it, but it is an option. Light can also be cast as a distance spell, and this is particularly useful because light can target an object that is being held or worn by another creature. And if you target an object held by an unwilling creature, they can make a dexterity saving throw to avoid the effect. But if they fail the saving throw, then something they're holding or wearing just lights up. And if something they're wearing is illuminated, they're probably not going to be able to hide very effectively. You're going to be able to track them in a crowd very easily. You can probably pick them out when they're invisible. There's a whole host of uses for that. Uh, so being able to cast distantly, not having to physically touch the object that the enemy is holding, that this other creature is holding, could definitely have some value in certain situations. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's going to come up in every session of every game because it's not. But when it comes up, it could be useful. If you have that Metamagic option anyway, you might as well use it. Moving away from utility, we have Spare the Dying, which I guess still kind of counts as utility, but it's sort of combat utility. You can stabilize a creature and prevent them from bleeding out. You can stop them from needing to make death saving throws. But Spare the Dying it does a job that can also be done by a medicine check of DC 10 or a healer's kit, which is a 5 gold piece item in the PHB. You can probably pick up at any random town. You get 10 uses with a healer's kit, so it's sort of like 5 silver per stabilization use, but that's a negligible cost, really. And like I said, if you have a high bonus to medicine, then you don't need either. You don't need the cantrip, you don't need the healer's kit. So I don't put a lot of value in this in general, but I wanted to mention it because if you have a level of Grave Cleric, which in general I think one level of Cleric is a good dip for a Divine Soul, Grave Clerics get bonuses to Spare the Dying. They can cast it as a bonus action, which is sort of like a free Quicken spell, and they can also cast it with a range of 30 feet, which is like a free distance spell. And they can do both of these at once, unlike Metamagic. And you could even stack a Metamagic on top of it. So you could, as a bonus action, stabilize 2 creatures with the twin spell Metamagic from a range of 30 feet. So if you have that Grave Cleric dip, might actually be worth casting in some situations. Although, the first level spell Healing Word restores hit points to a creature within 60 feet of you. It's already a bonus action, and it can be twinned, which I'll touch on more when I get to the first level spells. But the point is, that spell will do the job much better because it restores hit points to a creature, and they can rejoin the fight instead of lying on the ground unconscious but stable. So, personally, I don't put a lot of stock in Spare the Dying in general, but those are the metamagics that can affect it well. And if you're Grave Cleric, by all means, go for it. On the topic of combat cantrips, clerics get 3 damaging cantrips. They get Sacred Flame, Word of Radiance, as well as Toll the Dead. Toll the Dead and Sacred Flame work much the same way. The enemy makes a saving throw and takes damage. Toll the Dead, a lot of people view as better because if the target's already damaged, they take a d12 instead of a d8, or multiple of those dice at higher levels. So, quickening a different damaging spell, or the same one, would allow you to deal damage to a target, and then use your action to hit them with the cantrip Toll the Dead for d12s instead of d8s. So that's a pretty interesting combination. Sacred Flame doesn't really do that, and it's really the most basic of the combat cantrips that clerics get. It just does damage. Uh, it and Pull the Dead can be twinned, they can be quickened, they can be all the usual combat cantrip stuff. The real interesting one for me is Word of Radiance. Word of Radiance deals damage to creatures of your choice within its range of 5 feet. Now, because its range is 5 feet and not self with a radius of 5 feet, you can cast it as a distance spell and make that effective radius 10 feet. Now, that's not massive. It's essentially like a 5 by 5 space on a grid, but as a cantrip, that's a pretty good AoE. For the cost of a single sorcery point, you can actually catch a number of creatures in that area in most fights. And a lot of times, being able to hit multiple creatures with an AoE is worth more than hitting a single creature with a little bit more damage. For example, if you hit someone with a, let's say you're tier 2, 2d12, Toll the Dead, you're looking at an average of about 13 damage. Whereas if you hit 4 creatures with Word of Radiance as a distance spell, you're doing 2d6, average 7, to 4 creatures. And of course, all of this assumes they fail their saving throws, etc. But the point is you can deal a lot more total damage to a lot of creatures with Word of Radiance with this fairly sizable AoE. And of course, Word of Radiance can be quickened to cast it twice, although if you quicken it, you can't also cast it as a distance spell. So it has the smaller radius of 5 feet, but that's okay. If you get mobbed by enemies, just surrounded, Word of Radiance is a good option to deal all of them at once. It's one of the few cantrips that can. And it's the only one of those cantrips, the others being Sword Burst, Thunderclap. I think that's it, actually. Word of Radiance, unlike those other two, can discriminate between your allies and your enemies. You can choose which ones you damage. The other cantrips you can't. So Word of Radiance has that going for it. And you can use it even in a crowd where there are creatures like your allies or maybe innocents that you don't want to damage. It's like having the Evocation Wizard sculpt spells, but only for this one cantrip. But there is definitely value in that in certain situations. So I like Word of Radiance a lot with Distant, is the point. And with that, that wraps up all the cantrips. There aren't a huge amount for clerics, which is okay. There's some real spicy ones in there. And Metamagic certainly helps them out. So anyway, that's this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making it to the end. Hopefully I've introduced some new information, some interesting stuff. If you learned something, leave a like. I'm a YouTuber and I have to say things like that. If you want to see more, go ahead and hit subscribe because the YouTube algorithm doesn't know me yet and probably won't suggest my other videos to you unless you do. And that is about all. Thanks for watching. Peace.